get started. In true Verde Exchange fashion, we have 6 panelists and 40 minutes. So 6 amazing people with really insightful thoughts about climate change, the connection between climate and dealing with radical changes to our environment, and what this means in terms of urban planning and implications for that. So we're not going to take time doing introductions of our panelists. I'm going to call them up one at a time. They're each going to have about 4 or 5 minutes to kind of set a frame, and I'll do a little bit of transition, and then we're going to get into a conversation. But we're really excited about having our first speaker, Assemblymember Richard Bloom, has been such a leader on making that link between the environment, local planning, affordable housing, transportation, to help us set the stage of what California is doing in the future and how we're really going to achieve our climate goals, given that very challenging interplay between state regulation and local land use authority. So please welcome Assemblymember Richard Bloom.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. It's always great to sit at a table with so many stellar individuals, but also no plastic water bottles. I'm happy to see that this morning. Right, Andy?
You got it.
So thank you very much for inviting me here today. I apologize ahead of time. I have a flight to catch, and so I'm not going to be able to be around for much of the discussion this morning. But anytime that I'm in a conversation about climate change, you have a tendency to feel a little bit overwhelmed over it, because the topic is so broad and so important to all of us and to our future. But the technology and infrastructure that supports our expansion of our economy has consumed resources. It's destroyed ecosystems. Our forests, water, and air have all paid the price, and seldom have generations past questioned whether or not all of this was sustainable. If you think about our attention to the environment, it's really very much in recent years. And by recent years, probably the last 40 to 50 years, when the environmental movement really took off and we started understanding just how much damage our various systems were doing to the environment. So it is daunting when we consume ourselves with everything that's happened and all we need to do to slow down and maybe someday reverse the Earth's temperature. In recent decades, as I said, things have started to change, and AB 32 is part of that, followed by SB 32. On the coattails of these things, we've enacted renewable energy portfolio standards in recent years, energy efficiency goals. SB 375, our sustainable community strategy, has been very important in Sacramento. It calls for integrated planning in regions throughout the state to reduce our greenhouse gases. I think you know about most of these things, but what's very, very important is that the efforts that we've taken in California have now caught on worldwide. And we're not obviously the only state or the only place in the country or the only place in the world that is paying attention to the environment, and we should be mindful of that. But I can tell you from my experience both at the Paris Climate Accord and in Bonn, Germany, just a few months ago, California is looked to for its leadership on this issue. There's absolutely no question about it, and all the more so given the fact that there's a vacuum on leadership in Washington, D.C. At this point. People are really looking to California and both respect and admire and are trying to emulate what we're doing here in California. So we really need to keep it up. I want to also talk a little bit about this on the more local level, since we are talking about the urban planning aspect of this. It is tied directly, urban planning is tied directly to our climate planning. And just one example, I think, on a large scale that we don't commonly think about, but we really should be focusing on in the recent fires, make it all the more important that we do that. Tree mortality that's happening around the state, 110 million trees that are currently dead or dying around the state, are threatening our forests and contributing to the ignition of fires that we're seeing around the state. Well, how does this affect the urban environment? Look at what happened just a couple of months ago in the Thomas Fire. These fires are affecting the entire ecosystem, and we have to plan for them both in large-scale terms and in our urban environment. And it's not an easy thing to do. So what we now think of as a traditional approach to urban planning, at least I think of this, building sustainable cities, using sustainable building strategies, building energy efficient buildings, transit-oriented developments. This is all well baked into our planning now, and it's really kind of traditional. I think what we need to be thinking about for the future is adaptation. How are we going to adapt to our changing climate? Things like sea level rise and changing weather patterns that are affecting everything. Everything. Just think about some of the terrible things that have happened around the country and around the world, increasing hurricanes, the increasing intensity of hurricanes, more heat throughout the year. We've had the warmest years on record in recent years, and we need to figure out how to adapt to those. Not just how do we get our environment back into the place where we want it to be, which is going to take decades and perhaps longer. We have to do this in a way that is economically sustainable. The California economy is doing well, but we have to look at some of the other things that are going on, not just the environmental realm, because we've got some problems here. We have income disparity that is unacceptable in California. We have some of the worst poverty in California anywhere in the country. And we have a housing crisis that is ongoing that is exacerbating income disparity. Now, we can combine these efforts and work on both the economic disparity, the housing crisis, and improve our environment at the same time, but we have to do it in a way that is economically sustainable. So I'd like to leave you, and I apologize because there is only a limited amount of time this morning, but we need to do what California does best when it comes to the built environment, and that is innovate. We have to be thinking about changing the way that we build in California so that, we need to build under Measure H and HHH, 10,000 units of affordable housing. And there's no plan currently to do that. We know what the goal is, but there's no plan to get to that goal. So we need to be thinking about how to do that, and we can do it if we start building innovatively. And that's going to require new building materials. It's going to require looking at prefabricated units so that we can do things both efficiently and in an environmentally sensitive way. Thank you for allowing me a few minutes to speak with you this morning, and I look forward to the very short period of time that I'll be able to enjoy the conversation.
Thanks, Assemblymember. We talk about local building codes and talking about have to build energy efficient buildings. Right on the cusp of that is the California Energy Commission has really been driving so much change to make sure that everything we build is as green as possible. Decarbonizing our buildings is really the watchword for the California Energy Commission. They're also doing exciting things about electrifying our entire transportation system and integrated system. So let me welcome Andrew McAllister, a commissioner of the California Energy Commission.
Great. All right. I'm going to sit down here just to avoid all the ruckus every time we want to get up to the podium, just to save a few precious seconds.
Got it.
So thanks for having me on the panel. I, as a state official, at first I was sort of mystified. Why would I be on this panel? It's really about land use, and land use, which is really a local. It's under local control. But there are obviously many linkages between what the state does at the state level and what happens on the local level, and I can talk about a few of those, not an exhaustive list, but certainly in the energy sector there are many. So we own the Building Energy Code. So in fact, we're in the middle of the 45-day language period for the 2019 code update. Okay, and the code is incredibly complicated, and there are lots of reasons why it's complicated. Everybody needs to sort of get there. As we get more and more muscular and aggressive trying to get the requirements into the building code that are cost effective, we have to work through a lot of highly technical details and with a lot of stakeholders who have deep knowledge about these issues. And so we end up in places that maybe don't start out as intuitive, but end up being the right place to be for code. So that means that we now have, many, many hundred, thousands of pages of code that have to be navigated. So one of the things that I'm trying to work on, and certainly with the governor's backing, is to simplify the code, streamline it, make it easier to understand. And there are lots of ways to do that without making it less strict. And we have a lot of modern technology at our disposal. You can kind of think of TurboTax, kind of helping you navigate, only showing you what you need to know. Well, we're working on a lot of tools like that, which I'm very excited about, and they're going to help local governments. Local governments are where the rubber hits the road. They touch every single building, right? And the building code is that key sort of communication that we have with local governments, that communication could be a lot better. So building departments have a lot going on. After the crash, they've laid off most of their people, and they won't get up to those same levels of hiring. And so that's a challenge. They are overstressed and under-resourced, and so we need to try to fix that problem as well. That's uniform across the state. That building departments have too much to do. So if it's fire and safety versus, energy code, are we going to really get there and spend the whole day on site to make sure that they've done everything they need to do on this new house? Well, fire and safety, it's going to be the priority, and as it should be. So we need to make that ecosystem more manageable. I want to reiterate something that Richard said, which is energy efficiency is the number one policy initiative that the state has had for 40 years that we know works. Yeah. Makes all your problems smaller, right? If 50% renewables, 50% of a smaller number is a smaller number, right? 100%, of a smaller number is obviously a smaller number. So you consume less, you have to build less, you have to supply less, you need fewer resources to do that. I think overall, if I'll just wrap up really by saying we are headed in a direction that is toward, away from fossil fuels, obviously, but it's really toward electrification. And that could happen in a lot of different ways, okay? Change every vehicle to an EV could be as simple as that. Is that going to solve all of our local land use problems? No, absolutely not. We have some opportunities with once through cooling. We're going to get rid of a bunch of power plants on the coast that will open up some space in some pretty high-end communities. So there are cases like that where energy and sort of local land use just obviously have an intimate relationship. But the really key land use decisions happen at the local level. We work with progressive local governments who want to do stretch codes on the energy side. So they say, okay, we're going to require zero net energy. At Lancaster, Santa Monica, we have some really innovative stretch codes at the local level. We love to approve those stretch codes. They have to bring them to us for approval. And we learn from those. That iterative process helps us make the statewide code better. And so it's another place where local governments and the state really depend on each other to innovate. But I think, often I feel somewhat one hand tied behind my back because I don't own the land use issues, right? You're the ones who have to build up. You're the ones who have to do low-income housing. You're the ones who have to figure out ways to have better multifamily housing stock. We're doing a lot of work on, so SB 350 is sort of what we do most of the time, and there's a low-income effort there too, where we developed this big barriers effort to try to knock down barriers to energy efficiency and solar for low-income communities across the state. And multifamily has come out of that as just a real focus. And so I want to work with local governments to find solutions to our multifamily problem. Each, for instance, local family or multifamily buildings that are in the low-income sphere, well, they get rehabbed every 15 years. They get refinanced and rehabilitated or rebuilt in a substantive way every 15 years. So we need to take advantage of that fulcrum moment to improve those buildings and get really deep savings. So that's another place where state and locals can really work together. Hopefully we can figure out how to find some kind of facility to help make that happen. Not many rehabs are going to happen between now and 2050, and we need to make everyone count.
Great. All right, well, thank you, Andrew. And we're going to talk a little bit about that nexus between climate goals and actually providing affordable housing for everybody, right? This is a critical component. But first, let's have Andy Lipkus talk to us a little bit, pull back again on another element of the climate plan. I just want to set this up a little bit for Andy about, this is somebody who's been working consistently around trying to make sure that our cities are cooler and greener, better manage their water. But when we did our prep call, Andy really wanted to make the point that the infrastructure that we have today, notwithstanding all the fine work that we've done here in the state of California, but fundamentally the infrastructure in our cities today is completely unsuited for the climate that we're now feeling and that we're going to be feeling in the very, very near future. So we have to rebuild and reframe and reorient that infrastructure. And Andy's one of the best people I know to talk about how the small work at the local level actually can radically reshape the infrastructure for our metropolitan areas. Andy, give us 5 minutes.
Great.
And you only have a few slides, right?
Yep.
Okay.
I set a
Because we'll cut
timer.
you off, man. Okay.
So I just need to make sure I know how to get to the slide.
Okay.
Is that this one?
Great.
How do we get that to open? There we
You
go.
got it.
Okay. I have my bell. Well, thank you for that setup. It's really important that we wake up. That announcement of the change of context came from John Laird, the California Secretary of Natural Resources Agency, which heads CAL FIRE, the people who are handling the emergencies. So I have the uncomfortable job of saying it's time to really wake up. We are in a state of chronic emergency. Within a week after John Laird made that announcement that our infrastructure can no longer protect us from the current climate scenario, of course, the governor also said this is now the new norm. Hotter hots, wetter wets, drier dries, colder colds that are hurting and killing people in our cities across the state and around the country. A week after that announcement, Houston got hit. Then Florida. Then 4 concurrent hurricanes in the Gulf. Never happened before. Then Santa Rosa. Much more indicative of our challenge. An urban wildfire, the likes that we've never seen. Not a forest fire, but an urban forest fire. Because of these extreme winds, no warning, communities unready. So it's a chronic state of emergency. The cool thing is the context of planning. I thought I was on the wrong panel, but it turns out to be right. The only way we can get ahead of this is to use the context of planning in an urgent mode, the integration that that can provide to allow us to retrofit our cities quickly, adapt and mitigate. So I'm going to flip through a couple slides very quickly to give you the context of what it might look like. We're not talking about trees. I'm with Tree People, by the way, founder president. We've been working for 47 years in this city with partnership with a lot of you. The mistake is to think that trees are about decoration when they are actually the critical infrastructure for resiliency. And what urban forestry provides is actually a context of sustainability and a model for thinking about how you retrofit a city when you're looking at what forests do to protect from wind, from flooding, to add to water supply. So we can do it. This is what Los Angeles looks like. That's King Boulevard. An important thing is that planning's got to go from the top all the way to the very grassroots because we can't act fast enough with all our people. This is 80-something-year-old woman who dreamt of planting King Boulevard. This is, we planted with 3,000 LA residents in one day. This is 30 years later.
Yeah.
They're alive because the people were out on the street every month
That's right.
caring for them. Trees don't live without that. Here is Melbourne, Australia, after declaring, because of their early onset climate change, losing hundreds of people in urban heat waves that are now hitting here. They're hitting across the country, and we're losing people. They, through all the research they had at it, and figured out that they needed to increase their canopy cover from 20%, like LA's wealthiest neighborhoods have, to 40%. Emergency implementation. This is really fast. This is right in the heart of Melbourne, in their main street, where they implemented this Green Street canopy cover. We can do it here. We must. But not just planting trees. It's capturing the water. So part of the new climate scenario is Los Angeles going to have the same or slightly more rainfall. All scientists agree with that. But in far fewer storms, meaning when it hits, they'll be just like that atmospheric river that hit Santa Barbara a few weeks ago. 5 inches in an hour. We have enough water to meet our needs in Los Angeles through rainwater recycling. LA Department of Water and Power ran its stormwater capture master plan. That gives me a minute. But we have to retrofit the city to capture the flood water and save it here because we've run out of our normal water supplies. They're all drying up. We can do this. This is a neighborhood in Sun Valley done by the Watershed Council and Tree People. What does resilience look like? Capturing rain not just in streets, but under parks, under schools. This is at Tree People headquarters. It's a 250,000 gallon cistern put in the ground. That was empty when the drought started in 2014 in January. By February, it had rained 4 inches. We collected 87,000 gallons of water. 5 months later, LA had a red flag alert. This fire truck showed up, code 3. I ran out and said, "What's up?" And they said, "We heard you had water." I said, "We do, come and get it." That truck's job is to fill the helicopters. We run out of water during big fires, for those of you who grew up in LA. We had enough water from those 4 inches for 250 initial attack helicopters. That's resilience. We made that water available several weeks ago during the fire. Fire department didn't need it, but it was there and ready for them, and they had practiced. This is the way we need to think, distributing cisterns across the community, even to homes. Here's a pilot project done across Los Angeles, South LA, in the valley, where people put in cisterns from 1,000 gallons to 4,000 gallons. These are electronically networked, remote controlled, so DWP, sanitation, flood control can see the water and manage it for the extreme floods, for fires. Had we had those set up and people ready in Santa Rosa, there would have been a different outcome. The context of planning is how do we deal with and really confront the emergency state that we're now in? We've got to bring everybody together. We have to do it integrated. We know how to do this. This is the good news. Emergency command centers, that's what you're looking at there. LA has one, a huge one. Every city has one. We know how to do it, we can do it, and we'll talk about it. Thanks.
Great. Thanks, Andy. Thank you for your comment. So we have heard about energy. We've heard about water. The Assembly member in his opening remarks set the context about housing. And I am delighted to have on our panel Jill Stewart, who in her long and storied career, particularly in her time as a publisher, has long been the voice for equity and accountability. And Jill's got a few thoughts about how densification, climate, how this comes together in a real city.
Thanks, Cecilia. Hi, everybody. I'm going to give the angry version of what Andy was just talking about. I think there are 3 or 4 things going on at the state in Sacramento and in Los Angeles that are completely backwards from what we should be doing. In fact, more and more Sacramento does decide land use and impose land use on cities. Senate Bill 743 imposes transit priority areas. And we've done a map. We actually hired some people at Cal State Northridge who are famous map makers. And we've done a map that shows these transit priority areas go up into the ravines. It's a completely nonsensical approach to urban planning. I have a real problem, in fact, with Metro. I think Metro has spent, since I was a journalist, a young journalist at the LA Times in the 1990s, I believe Metro has spent several $billion trying to get people out of their cars, and it is a huge disaster. Metro is the most expensive, ineffective thing going on in the country in transit, and they're the leaders, supposedly. That is not working out. And I'm really glad to have heard Mary Nichols and a couple of other people in the morning session say, we need to analyze what's actually working. Metro has the same number of riders today in Los Angeles as we had in 1985. Why are we spending billions of dollars on a plan that does not work? One of the things we think should happen is they should actually analyze what is making people avoid transit. They are going to find out, in fact, in the fall, USC will be doing a study because of the unease over Metro's spending and the city council and the mayor's spending and decision making involving luxury housing next to the transit stops. You have tremendous amount of luxury housing going in. The people who live in it do not take the transit. So what you have is a mismatch. Now, there's a study that's being funded by USDOT and a consortium of universities, and USC will have the study out in, I think, September. Please look for it. by Professor Bornett. Please look out for this. It's going to be the very first study of its kind, as far as we know, that looks at every single transit stop, not bus, just the transit, just the rail, to see who's moved in by the rail, who is going into these areas, the concern being that the gentrification problem, which the city is supporting and subsidizing, which the state is supporting and subsidizing, which almost all of the state laws, SB 743, it's essentially subsidizing more luxury housing and a tiny bit of affordable housing. This isn't working in Los Angeles. We have no extra people riding on our transit. It's beautiful, it's gorgeous, it looks cool. Nobody is getting on. We have no extra riders. So that's problem number one. We have to go back and reconsider what we're doing there. The second thing, which Andy brought up, is the tree canopy. Urban planning in Los Angeles is about to allow all kinds of construction where the buildings go out to the sidewalk. It's called Recode LA. It's going to allow a tremendous amount of local decision-making that wipes out the area and spaces for urban tree canopies. We used to call it, when I was a young journalist covering the battles over the Ballona wetlands and all of the other issues I covered, we called it a green belt. Every building had to have some sort of a green belt, all of the big condo projects and so on. The new concept will wipe out much of that land. They want to cram as many people as possible. They still believe that if they cram as many people as possible next to transit, this will affect global warming. It's not going to work. They're going to wipe out the space for the trees. So I'm involved in fighting that. We're involved in trying to get the city planning department in Los Angeles to wake up. Now, I went to the wonderful event yesterday at the Japanese consulate, and somebody said, you know, Jill, there is no Los Angeles city planning department. There are 16 planning departments in Los Angeles. The mayor makes his own decisions, political decisions on land use, and each and every city council member makes their own political decisions on land use. And the planning department is really a very weak and ineffective entity in Los Angeles. So you have this huge problem of a runaway train in essence. And I think the bullet train it's a warning. The 77% over cost, there is zero evidence that it will reduce climate change, that it will reduce global warming and help on climate change. And it's a warning to everybody that at the state level, we also have this dreaming idea without analysis. This morning, as Mary Nichols and I think Senator Murkowski mentioned, Wachowski, I hope I'm pronouncing it right, that we have to analyze which things aren't working. What do the numbers show? Analyze what's been done for the last 5, 10, 15, 20 years. Is it working? And in Los Angeles, the answer is going to be no. We are not sustainable. The final topic I want to touch.
Gotta wrap.
I'm all done. Okay. The final thing I want to talk about was that affordable housing, one of the big ways to build it is by reuse, building reuse. Please look up the following two studies. One is called The Greenest Building. The Greenest Building is a study showing that building reuse is far more green than tearing down and putting up a LEED certified building. It eats less carbon. It creates less carbon release, less of the embedded carbon problems that we have with tearing down and rebuilding. Please take a look at that. The city of LA and the state of California are not promoting building reuse. They talk about it, they think it's cool, they do nothing about it. It's very important. Thank you.
Thanks, Jill. Okay, so I think it's great to pull back a little bit and have a friend from our northern neighbor and my favorite city in the world, Vancouver. We have Patrick Condon from the University of British Columbia. And Vancouver's a little bit ahead of us in trying to deal with these issues of density and integrating transit and land use decisions. So tell us what we should be doing here.
It's really great to follow Jill because we've had certainly all the...
and I'm going to give you a 1-minute warning.
Yeah, please do. I would love that. And I'm sure I can count on you for that. Let's see. Well,
Got it. Where's our tech?
no, it's
You got
okay. I think I just screwed up here. Slideshow, there it is. From beginning. Okay, Jill, that was great, and Andy's always great, and I can't talk without slides, so I've got a few slides to show, and I'm
That's the
sure
danger of
you're
professors
super
on panels.
nervous, but
So, okay.
here we go. I'm going to try to throw some big ideas out here and try to tie them together to show how this thing I call the streetcar city is connected to greenhouse gas reduction, also connected to demographics, affordability, and all these things are connected. So in Vancouver, just like Jill's talking about with the metro system, we've done this crazy metro system called the SkyTrain. And your metro and our SkyTrain, even more so, is inspired by George Jetson and Company, because it tries to use technology and cutting edge to do something simple at a very expensive price and does it ineffectively. Because here is the 10-minute walking distance reach of the metro system in our area. And just like Jill talked about, it's being occupied by high-rise towers that are selling for $3,000 a square foot, and everybody drives a Bentley, so they don't need these, they really don't actually use the metro system. Curiously, the way the area really worked was, and still does work, with this walkability map on the left shows where people actually walk a lot and therefore generate way fewer greenhouse gases, correlates to the previous streetcar system in our city. This is true everywhere you look. Seattle, greenhouse gas map done by Center for Neighborhood Technology shows a direct correlation between where people live in urban environments that grew up during the streetcar era and how they actually get around. And generally it means without having to beat them over the head, they walk more and drive less. So now we turn then for the next 3 minutes to Los Angeles. Here's an interesting, I got 3. Los Angeles is the United States' densest city, so it's doing pretty good in terms of density. But interestingly, it performs more poorly than does other places that are even lower density, such as Sydney, Australia. Of course, the reason is that they didn't destroy their city with freeway systems, so that the streetcar city fabric was left largely intact. But still, having said that, LA still performs well in the legacy streetcar and red car districts, as these two comparative maps show. The lighter the color, the less greenhouse gases that people are throwing off. Anyway, something completely different that relates to it, really, the collapse of birth rates. So in the midst of all this question about greenhouse gases and the cities that work well, you have a dramatic reduction in the size of families. It has other implications, but we'll focus on that just now. And what that means is some parts of your city are actually reducing their density and their population, while others who have a different cultural ethos towards families and how they inhabit the parcel are getting more population. As shown in these, so East LA, they've got this very interesting fabric. If you really look at the parcel from the street, you don't notice what's going on, but from above, you see that they've already infilled the backyard substantially, whereas that's not happening in Santa Monica. That partly explains why the population is growing there and shrinking in other parts of the region. So I'll come back to that in the last minute. And before I do that, I'll talk about the affordability side of the whole problem. These dramatic charts show just how unaffordable Vancouver is. And without taking the time to give you all the details, I'll just tell you it's a crisis, and nobody with a normal job can afford to buy a home there. The question is this happening in LA? You see on the right-hand side the dip that the 2008 recession caused, but you've climbed back to the absurd levels of previous to that Great Recession. And the ones that are being impacted, like some of you in this room, are the millennials who simply can't afford anything at all in Vancouver, and increasingly that's the case in Los Angeles. In Vancouver, we've started to, and I've been advancing this idea, so I'm happy that they're taking advantage of my brilliance, and starting to say what we need to do is go into the parcels, and much like in East LA where this is happening informally, do this actually through legislation. Take single-family home areas and let them be stratified or condominiumized to get 3, 4, and 5 dwelling units on the parcel. It makes sense because the families are smaller, and of course the correlation with the income makes it affordable, whereas the single family is not. So this is in fact my last slide.
Beautiful.
The suggestion here is that the question around greenhouse gases and transportation movements should relook at the legacy historic streetcar fabric, and also start to think about how existing parcels can be adapted to different economic situations and family sizes.
Great, thank you, Professor Condon. Okay, and to bring us home on the presentations and the framing is Richard Bruckner, who's with Mayor Brown, but formerly was the Director of Regional Planning for the County of Los Angeles. And I don't know, Richard, if you're going to come up or you're going to
I'll sit right
opine
here.
there.
This is fine. Given the time,
Yeah, no, Richard's got some great thoughts about what we do in terms of density here in Los Angeles without having the massive displacement that we've been experiencing to date.
well, thank you. First, I want to change the tone here and be very positive. I have a positive
you.
outlook
Thank you for that.
on Los Angeles, and being the former director of regional planning, being the last speaker is probably appropriate because everyone says, what does that person do? Well, if you think about LA County, which is 4,000 square miles, about 2,000 square miles is unincorporated territory that the regional planning plans. About 400 square miles of it is the city of LA, which we tend to dwell on. But I'm upbeat because the new and newly elected Board of Supervisors, been in place a couple of years, is very forward-thinking, very positive, and very much in tune with what's being said here today. And it's being implemented from a policy perspective. The recently adopted new general plan for the city, for the county, I'm very pleased to say, is based on some very high-level GIS data about where floods are, where fires are, where the ecology is important, where flood zones are, and densities were reduced dramatically in areas that have all of those issues, and increased dramatically where there is opportunities for infill and, despite what we've heard, and transit accessibility. So I am upbeat about what's going to happen in the remaining portions of the county outside of the city. I'm also very encouraged because I'm a Gold Line rider from the San Gabriel Valley, and it's standing room only in the mornings, and that line didn't exist 10 years ago. So it's being used, despite what some of the numbers are. It is absolutely being used. In terms of the densification, the area that I see the great opportunities for, unlike Patrick, and maybe a little bit of contrast to Patrick, is not in the single-family neighborhoods, because, quite frankly, I've learned that those battles are just too hard. But along the streetcar corridors, there's phenomenal opportunity. Those long, long boulevards of commercial, strip mall, old shopping centers, I'm very encouraged. The way we shop today, the way retail works, many of those spaces are becoming obsolete, and there is tremendous opportunity for infill. We've also upzoned the areas around the transit stations in the unincorporated area, and I tend to agree with both Jill and Patrick in those areas. Those will be higher priced, luxury dwelling units, but there is tremendous opportunity along those long corridors, which are well served by bus lines or light rail lines. So I'll just leave it with that thought and get on with a conversation.
Great, thank you, Richard. So I want to throw out for the panel a couple of just questions of where we're seeing trends that may actually hurt us in the future regarding climate change and dealing with land use. And this one we've talked about a little bit, but we're seeing right now a lot of displacement. We've put a lot of investment in this TOD strategy. We haven't really done much with the affordable housing side, and now we've seen voters pass, both at the county and the city level, a lot of funding for affordable housing. It's very early in the rollout of that, but we still have a lot of displacement occurring where we've been investing in public transit, and yet the very people who ride it are being displaced. We've also at the same time seen a convergence of autonomous vehicles, ride-hailing services, and basically this displacement of transit folks. So I want to actually turn to you, Andrew, because you guys have been looking a lot at trying to electrify our transit system. We're looking at trying to do 3 million, 5 million zero-emission vehicles. So can you paint me a picture about what you all are doing at the state that might address kind of this scary convergence that could go either way? It could mean that we have a lot more emissions. It could mean we have a lot more displacement. It could completely undercut the financial model for public transportation. What can we do at the state level to actually help address this convergence?
So I mean, I think electrification is going to improve all of our lives, and independently, there are lots of scenarios, and some of them are more utopian and others dystopian in terms of our settlement patterns and kind of the lives that people live. And I think, certainly that's a really the core idea of this discussion, and I'm probably the least qualified to comment on that piece. But as we move towards green grid power and as we move towards electrified technologies, we are going to have cleaner air, and we are going to have more flexibility in our choices going forward. So I think as we evolve away from combustion in our buildings, in our homes, in our cars, that opens up a lot of possibilities that didn't exist, very recently. And I'll just layer on top of that the sort of digital economy, where a lot of this can be automated. A lot of the cloud-based kind of intelligence can be used to utilize our resources more effectively. And so this is on the autonomous vehicle side, but it's also our homes and businesses, so that those actually operate with a much smaller footprint. And it's all kind of behind the curtain, and people don't have to become experts in all of this. So a lot of if we rely on every single person to research a topic and make a choice, we're going to fail.
Right.
We really have to build it into our public policy at all levels. And so I think that's where sort of state, county, city, neighborhood interactions really have to sort of step up their game and be aligned towards all of these common goals.
Jill, I'm wondering if you just have a couple of comments about kind of that convergence of autonomous vehicles, EVs, and electrification.
Yeah, I think it's very difficult for government and the private sector to see the future, and nobody really thought that Uber and Lyft were going to take over our lives in such interesting ways. So at the same time this is happening where we don't know what the future. What's Elon Musk going to do with his tunnels? What's that going to be like in 20 years? The real issue for me, I think, is the immediacy of displacement while we're doing all of this. And I love what Richard is talking about here. Richard is probably one of the top, I think, urban planners in the country, because he kind of listens to the people, and a lot of city planners don't do that. And of course he's at the county level, but he was a Pasadena city planner, and I don't remember where else, somewhere in Orange County. And his idea of these smaller buildings instead of high-rises, which are fundamentally unaffordable. You cannot house everyday people in high-rises. They are just too expensive, and that's the lesson from Vancouver and every other tall skyscraper city in the world. They are unaffordable. So if we can do what he's talking about, which is 2- and 3-story buildings along the corridors, building reuse would come into play here, because he's talking about the empty storefronts. There's so much of that in Los Angeles and every city. It would be amazing. So
I'm
think
gonna
about that.
I'm going to move us to a quick hit because our time is almost over here. So I'm going to ask each of you to comment on here's my question. What's the most positive trend you see in terms of this convergence of cities dealing with climate change and climate adaptation? I don't know if you want to go first, Andy?
Sure.
Yeah. The most positive trend you see happening.
Looking to Australia and areas that have had to deal with this up to 20 years ahead of us, and now it's in our face. So they've proved that it's technically, socially, and economically feasible to go places that we don't think are. That has to require integration of multiple agencies working together. We're seeing that happen. The good news is that we will spend in LA city and county alone just on stormwater quality and a bit of it on water supply up to $100 billion in the next 30 years. We're spending it to fix things. That doesn't include flood protection. It doesn't include a lot of the other stuff that's going to be spent. If we don't see that we're spending that day in and day out and seize that opportunity as if it is a real emergency and bring all the players to the table, the money will get spent the same way as Jill has documented and Patrick has. It'll be as if we didn't spend it at all. The problems will persist. The opportunity is to do it right with the lens of equity and seeing that we can invest in people in our communities instead of electrical power, more vulnerability, more resilience by building urban forests that can be cooling offline when the power's down during severe heat waves, and employing people and making this a truly sustainable and resilient economy.
Patrick, you get 30 seconds, followed by Richard Bruckner.
30 seconds, wow.
Most positive trend you see.
Yeah, I have a hard time being optimistic, actually. So, so
You may not get to comment
I'm
then,
gonna
Patrick.
try to paint something optimistically. you know, I think these big changes that I was trying to talk about, demographic shift and economic frustration and inequality, the good news that comes out of that is it forces our world and our people to look at smaller solutions to bigger problems because of those constraints. So the same constraints that we're talking about might be the vehicle by which we are basically forced to do something greener and smaller and more affordable in time.
Richard, you want to comment?
Yeah, just quickly, and to try and be positive here, I think what Andy pointed out in the storms we've seen, the fires, the floods, I think it's all come home, and I think we've got leadership now that recognizes that and wants to build it into the way we shape our future. So I'm positive about it. I think it's been a hard lesson to learn, but I think the lesson's being learned.
Great, Jill, and then we're going to end with.
Okay, sorry, not positive.
Oh, come on, Jill. You got to try. You got to try.
I'm kidding. I'm going to give you a positive. I don't think the positive pieces are going to come from the government. I do think that organizations, community-based organizations, I am running one of them, nonprofits, are going to be the voice of how to rethink this and how to redo the issues that are being done poorly right now. People are fighting back, and everybody wants to say that the NIMBYs are fighting back. It's not really the NIMBYs who are fighting back. Working class people are saying that they don't have parks and trees, that they don't have affordable housing. So I think what we're going to see is more community organizations pushing, and what they're going to ask for is rewards instead of punishment.
Yeah.
Road diets that people freak out about and that force people to spend 30 minutes more getting home is not going to be the answer. There's going to be unique ideas, and I think one of them will be, perhaps at the state level, a rebate, a tax rebate, if you can prove that you are now working out of your home, instead of, in the city of Los Angeles, a huge bill that you get for freelancing out of your home in the city of Los Angeles.
Okay, I like that idea. Andrew McAllister.
I guess just a vision of how this really, much of this has to take place. It's project by project. You know, a local government touches every single infrastructure project. It's every building permit that gets pulled for a single family residence on up to any refi of a multifamily residence, and obviously all the transportation infrastructure. Huge touches all along the way by local government, and that's your city, your county, your COG, your MPO. So I think the vision going forward has to be that this coordination take place every time there's a permit pulled, every time there's a project. And so if it doesn't happen in some kind of integrated and rational way, then we're not going to have each little piece related to the whole. And the whole is a pretty different future. And so we've got to be very intentional about it. I think we have certainly the technology. We need the sort of human systems to put it all together and make it happen every single little step of the way.
So we've heard about the power of individual small, smart decisions, the importance of integration, the importance of spending $1 to do multiple things, the importance of people coming together with great ideas and forcing local government to respond to them. I would add one more thing, two more things really, is that people are willing to invest in their communities. We've seen that with a parks bond, with housing money being supported. We're going to maybe have a stormwater measure. Certainly people have been investing in transportation. But the second piece about that is equity is now an issue that's coming through in every one of the panels and everything we do, and that's wonderful. That goes back to accountability. We can't displace the people who actually have the smallest footprint and the smallest greenhouse gas emissions. We actually need to serve all folks in our city. So with that, folks, thank you very much. Let's thank the panelists. They were terrific.